One of the most important spiritual and psychological practices is self-observation. By observing ourselves with honesty, curiosity, and compassion, we embark upon a journey of self-discovery, personal growth, and spiritual awakening, which leads to greater awareness, clarity, and inner freedom. Self-observation means observing ourselves, both outwardly and inwardly. Outwardly, we observe our behavior, our actions, our habits, how we engage in life, how we engage with others, and so on. And inwardly, we observe our thoughts, our emotions, our various psychological tendencies. We observe all of it as if stepping back from ourselves and simply watching. And in order to observe, we need to have a kind of childlike curiosity. Not judgment, not condemnation, not a sense of already knowing ourselves, but just an open curiosity of wanting to see and to understand. And if there is any judgment, which oftentimes there is, we can observe that also. We can observe that tendency to judge. And we might observe how judgment gets in the way of observation, how judgment creates aversion, so that we don't want to look at whatever it is that we're judging. Our tendency is to look the other way, even to the point of denial in some cases. So we need to learn to look without judging, or at the very least, not to let judgment stand in the way of looking. Self-observation requires honesty. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be willing to acknowledge those things which we would rather turn our attention away from, which we would rather ignore or deny. And in the place of judgment, we need to have compassion and understanding. And we can start by recognizing that we don't really understand why we do what we do. We might observe that even in regard to those things for which we judge ourselves, that they tend to be compulsive, meaning that we don't seem to have any control. It just happens. It's not that we are acting consciously. It's not that we're making a conscious choice. We might judge some thought or feeling or behavior as being bad, and yet we continue to do it. We might not want to do it, but it just happens, even against our wishes. And yet, we judge ourselves as if it was a conscious choice, as if we had control of it. But in actuality, we're not in control. So many things are happening automatically, mechanically, unconsciously. So many of our thoughts and emotions and behaviors are simply happening without our control, without our choosing, without even realizing that they're happening sometimes. If we can understand that these things are happening unconsciously, compulsively, mechanically, then how can you judge yourself? You're not in control. You're essentially a hostage to these unconscious tendencies. These things are happening even when you don't want them to happen, even when you make the determination not to allow them to happen, they often wind up happening anyway. Sometimes we might reflect upon our behavior and wonder, why did I behave in that way? Or why did I say that? And we might wish that we had behaved differently. But if we really want to change these things, we have to be conscious of them. You have to understand them, why they occur, what's giving rise to them. You have to understand the mechanisms behind it. And in order to understand, you have to observe. You have to be curious. If we only try to change our outward behavior, it can be very difficult. Even if we manage to change it for a time, we will still tend to revert back to the old behavior. And this is like trying to cure ourselves of some disease only by treating the symptoms. Our behavior is only a symptom of deeper psychological mechanisms. Without addressing those mechanisms, it's extremely difficult to change our behavior. We're struggling against unseen forces. But if we can go deep and discover what is at the root of our behavior, we don't necessarily have to make an effort to change it. If we can examine what is at the root of it, if we can understand it, this understanding is often enough to dissolve it. If we can address what is giving rise to that behavior, the behavior will naturally change as a result. What we're talking about here is the way in which most of us live. That most of us live in a way that is unconscious and mechanical. And that we are driven by forces which we are not even aware of. Unconscious fears and desires, impulses, conditioning, and so on. That most of us are asleep to ourselves, that we live in a kind of trance. So what we're really talking about is waking up. And self-observation is a very important means for waking up. So we begin observing ourselves in daily life at any given moment. We get into the practice of stepping back and watching ourselves and observing the ways in which we behave, observing our thought patterns, our emotional reactions, even our judgments. We step back and observe the whole thing. And initially, we're not trying to change anything. We're not evaluating anything. We're simply observing. The aim is to simply observe and to understand. And in this observation, you will notice that you are something other than what you observe. As you step back from yourself, that self which you step back from, that self which you begin to observe, it's not your true self. That person, with all of its various psychological tendencies, its various emotions and behaviors and so on, that's not you. How can it be? After all, you're the one observing it. You are that which observes, that which is aware. You begin to see how the person who you've taken yourself to be is just a bundle of ideas and beliefs, impulses and conditioning, which is operating mechanically like a well-programmed machine. As you come to observe all of these underlying mechanisms, you see how everything is happening according to those mechanisms. Even when it seems that we're acting of our own free will, making deliberate choices and so on. When you look more deeply, you see how every choice is determined by some unconscious mechanism. And you begin to wonder if there's anything we do which is not already determined by these mechanisms. But I don't want to get too philosophical with all of this. This isn't about intellectual or conceptual knowledge. This is about a deeper understanding which can only come about through direct observation. We can philosophize about this, we can theorize and postulate, we can engage in all sorts of logical exercises, but that's not really getting to the heart of it. So self-observation is a way of coming to know for oneself what is true in regard to oneself. To not simply settle for some second-hand concept or belief in regard to who or what you are, or why you think, feel, and behave as you do, but to actually find out, to see for yourself.